Then I took a smidge and applied it down there.
This one's wife. Why has the press not queried the pregnancies? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Pregnancy and the arrival of children is a tried and tested method of control used by narcissists. Whether it is getting the intimate partner primary source pregnant at an early stage, or the narcissist becoming pregnant at an early stage to the intimate partner primary source, it is often the case that a narcissist will use the issue of pregnancy and having children as a means to seal the deal of control. After all, the idea that somebody wants to have children with you is often seen as the pinnacle of romance, that you want to not only spend your life with them, but you want to create a family together, that you want to have little offspring running around the patter of tiny feet. Not only does this appeal to many people of an empathic nature, it also, of course, is a means by which a narcissist will tap into that empathic nature as a means to ensnare. Gosh, he wants to have children with me. He must really love me. She wants to have my children. That shows she's just completely into me. This is wonderful. And thus, the unsuspecting individual, governed by their own emotional thinking, fails to see the red flags and fails to realize that that person getting you pregnant so soon or becoming pregnant so quickly is actually doing so in order to control you and is binding you to them in a way which becomes very difficult for many people to deal with when it all goes wrong. It therefore came as no surprise to learn that this one's wife became pregnant fairly quickly following the commencement of her relationship with Prince Harry. Indeed, there were rumours that she used the issue of pregnancy in order to force Harry to marry her and for the Queen to give her blessing. Whilst there's no definitive evidence to support that, it similarly would not be a surprise to learn that she may well have claimed to have been pregnant, perhaps even faking a pregnancy test, in order to compel him to propose and for the Queen to provide her approval. Such a manipulation is entirely common with narcissists. However, she wasn't pregnant at the time of engagement nor marriage, and thereafter 2 children have appeared, Archie and Lilibert. There is considerable speculation about these children and their existence. It ranges from those that suggest that the children don't actually exist, and the children that have been seen are the children of other people that have been wheeled out, essentially as models or actors to give the impression of the existence of children, to others suggesting that the children do exist, but it's rather strange that they're hardly ever seen. I've explained elsewhere why that is. That they are actually not born by this one's wife, but rather from a surrogate. The use of a surrogate is not something that one would be ashamed of, but of course for a narcissist this would be problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, it would dent the facade of being this natural mother. Secondly, it would dent the concept of superiority, the fact that she wasn't able to have the children herself, somebody else had to do it for her. Thirdly, there is the issue with the line of succession, which is naturally an important triangulation point for this one's wife. Therefore, if surrogates were used, that would have to be kept very quiet for the reasons that I've just explained. This has then led to the suggestion that this one's wife was never actually pregnant. There are many videos, many opinion pieces dotted around on the internet that go down the route of suggesting that either the children don't exist or they came from a surrogate, but either way, this one's wife was never pregnant. Much is made of the shape of her body, the age that she's at, the apparent speed by which she got pregnant, miscarried, and then was pregnant again. Some of the rather unusual behaviours surrounding the births, the fact that she doesn't talk about the births, that she doesn't really talk about being a mother, save to say how wonderful it is, and much speculation about the use of a moon bump to feign pregnancy. There are many videos that show photographs that purportedly demonstrate that this bump changes position, changes shape, changes size, that it actually shrinks as the pregnancy actually progresses, that it collapsed at one point and can be heard collapsing, that it dropped down in a particular photograph, and this has convinced many people that she wasn't actually pregnant and therefore faked it. I've explained elsewhere that faking a pregnancy is potentially something that a narcissist would do. But all of this then leads to a question in relation to, if it's the case that this pregnancy wasn't, or both pregnancies weren't actually genuine, then why hasn't the press looked at it? This one's wife is regularly in the press. It's safe to say she's in it every single day. There are daily articles on things that have been brought up from the past, her own PR puff pieces, and of course whatever she's currently doing is aired, dissected and commented upon. There are a variety of different topics, and she finds herself subjected to repeated criticisms, many of which legitimate, appearing in newspapers such as the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the New York Post, Telegraph, the Times, Daily Beast, News International, Geo.tv, and there are others with various international variations around the world. She also finds herself subjected to the observations of broadcasters such as Piers Morgan and Meghan Kelly. Accordingly, given that 1, she's so prominent, 2, there's such an appetite to report on her, 3, there's a stable of waiting critics, and 4, given the ramifications of a false pregnancy, you would think that there would be investigative work undertaken by the press to determine whether the pregnancies were legitimate or not. And yet, there is complete silence from the mainstream media on this point. Whilst they may occasionally recognise that there has been speculation about the pregnancy by others, usually in the context of referring to YouTube videos, the mainstream media has been almost singularly silent with regard to questioning the issue of the pregnancies. They haven't picked up on the suggestions that have been made by various commentators on social media to take it any further. Or have they? Why is it that the press has not queried the pregnancies, given that so many other people have done so? Well, the first and most obvious answer is that the allegations that appear on social media are simply wrong, that it's not true, that she was pregnant, that members of the press know this to be the case, that they've undertaken some preliminary investigative work and have seen evidence that proves that she gave birth to the children. And therefore, it's a case of there's nothing to report. They're not going to positively report those facts because, in essence, that's not a story. Woman did, in fact, give birth to her children. Some would say, well, they ought to, because it would put an end to the speculation, but they're not necessarily going to do her a favour, and those that would support her aren't even going to countenance the suggestion that they would be called into question in the first place. Therefore, there's no motivation for either the for or against press packs to comment on it if it turns out that she did give birth to the children and it wasn't true. The second reason would be that even if there was a suspicion, or that there is evidence that it didn't take place, that they're not going to publish it out of respect to the Queen. That at the time that she was alive, such a contentious matter was seen as being entirely disrespectful to the monarchy, and therefore newspaper editors, whilst in possession of the information that the pregnancies were not legitimate, decided not to do so. It certainly is the case that various newspaper editors have in their vaults stories about particular individuals which are rather saucy. I know of a number myself from contacts that I have, but they won't run them. The reason being is that the individual that's the subject of them is deemed to be somewhat untouchable, that they experience particular public favour, that it would not be deemed appropriate to release these stories because of the backlash that would come from the public against the newspapers. Therefore, these individuals are not touched. And it might be that this is done not so much as out of respect for this one's wife, but was done out of respect to the Queen and the monarchy. But of course, Queen Elizabeth is no longer with us. Is it possible that it's done out of respect to King Charles? Well, it's possible, but he doesn't engender the same level of respect as the late Queen Elizabeth did. And the issue of the pregnancies, if they were not legitimate, will be such a huge scoop, you would think that ultimately at least one newspaper would want to get ahead of the rest and report on it. What about, and I've just touched upon it there, the issue of the public mood, that the newspapers think, no, it would be a step too far to talk about this, that the public wouldn't accept it and they would see that it would be intrusive and unpleasant. Well, that ultimately doesn't hold water. There are plenty of people that don't like this one's wife and would be quite frankly salivating at the prospect of a mainstream newspaper dishing the dirt on the issue of the pregnancies. It's unlikely that there would be such a huge public backlash. There would be from certain quarters with regard to her supporters, and perhaps some people would think that it was a step too far because it is a private matter. But then there'd be others that would argue it's very much in the public interest. These children are in the line of succession, and if it's a case that they weren't born from this one's wife, then people ought to know. Accordingly, the potential options are: it's simply not true, hence there's nothing to report. That they have found something, but they choose not to report out of respect to the Queen and now King Charles, or that they've decided that there is something there, but they're not going to do so because of the potential backlash from the public. The first suggestion is one which has considerable weight. You're not going to report on it if it's true. The respect issue potentially made sense while Queen Elizabeth was alive, but less so in relation to King Charles. With regard to public mood, there's plenty of appetite for the story, so I don't see that as being the major reason. But then there is a fourth. And the fourth reason is that there is a super injunction that's in place to prevent the press from ever making mention about the legitimacy or otherwise of the pregnancies. The press would not even be able to report on the presence of such an injunction if one exists. And the wholesale silence by the press, to my mind, supports this. It's either the case that it's just scurrilous rumours, and she did give birth to the children, and it's basically nothing to see here, so they haven't reported on it, or there is something, hence all of the speculation that has gone on social media, but the press can't touch it because the courts have said that they're not allowed to. There's certainly sufficient material generated in the pictures, the videos, the theories that one sees on social media that would cause one to question, was there legitimate pregnancies? And therefore, in the circumstances, it would not be a surprise if a newspaper had started to investigate it, told the House of Sussex about what they had unearthed, and then steps were taken to shut them up as a consequence of it not being in the public interest, for it being a breach of privacy, etc. Certainly, a narcissist would take the step of trying to nullify what would be a massive threat to control in relation to the children, and, of course, the image of the narcissist, by seeking a super injunction. At this stage, we don't know. There could be one, but nobody would be allowed to talk about it even if there were one. It's only with the passage of time that it might become apparent, dependent upon how long the injunction is to remain in place, if one exists. It's certainly something that a narcissist would do, and therefore it's not beyond the realms of possibility. Indeed, So devastating would it be to this one's wife in terms of her facade and her control over people generally, that her narcissism would very much compel her to seek such an injunction. It would potentially lose her huge amounts of support from her own supporters, and, of course, would condemn her once again in the eyes of so many to say what a liar she is, what a charlatan she is, that she has even lied about the births of her own children. And that could potentially finish her off. Thus, if, and of course it remains entirely speculation, that the pregnancies did not take place, it might well be that the press have not reported on it because there is a super injunction in place, something that a narcissist would seek. To my mind, therefore, the reason the press have not touched upon this issue is either, one, it's not true, and therefore they know that to be and there's no story to report, or two, there is something to report, but they've been gagged from doing so, as a narcissist has sought to nullify this massive threat to control through the use of a super injunction. What are your thoughts on the matter of the press failing to report anything to do with the possibility of the pregnancies not being legitimate? What do you think about the fact that they've never queried it? Do you agree with my conclusions, or do you think it's something else? Let me know in the comments section. I'm HT Tudor. Thank you for listening.